Kristen Staley, and Kristen is with the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency, an organization that I have worked with in the past. I'm going to have you get right up on top of that microphone, move it right in front of you. And Kristen is working on, I did a lot of work in juvenile justice, and I didn't know that this was a problem. One of the main focuses in one of her areas right now is to try to make a change in the law regarding how we deal with juvenile offenders. And tell us about that, because I was shocked.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks. So we've taken upon a new project, and we've entitled it Youth Behind Bars. So last June, we published a report that found in the last 10 years, we've incarcerated over 20,000 young kids under the age of 18 in the state of Michigan. We've prosecuted them as an adult, and they've ended up in the adult correction system. Now, 95% of that 20,000 number were there simply because they were age 17. Now, Michigan is one of only 9 states left in the entire country that automatically prosecutes 17 years old as adults, regardless of whatever the crime is. If they're not convicted, they still end up on an adult caseload. Now, I'll tell you, this trend is quickly going away. When we published the report last June, we were one of 10 states. Now we're one of 9. New Hampshire just changed their laws. But we still have a long way to go to make that big change. This is a law that's been on the books for actually about a century.
Now, that's twofold to get the law changed. First, you have to find some champions in the legislature who want to do this, and then you have to see whether you can get enough to vote for it. Do you have some champions who've come on board?
We do, and it's while we want to raise the age, is what kind of the catch term is, it, if you will. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of things that came out with the research that we did. We found out that we can try a young person at any age in the state of Michigan. And we found as young as 10 years old in the adult correction system. Many of us remember Nathaniel Abramson, who was 11 years old and made a very big media splash. He was the youngest person in the entire country at that time to be tried as an adult. We also, things like that that we're finding youth of color being disproportionately tried as adults in the state of Michigan.
Absolutely.
Which is not unlike many other states. We find across the country that youth of color are much more likely to end up deeper into the system. We're finding that when we take apart and we take apart not just males but females, that girls are receiving inadequate treatment. It's that the example of that is we're actually seeing an increase of young girls entering the system because of traumatic histories, past very soon. But in the meantime, what we've been doing is to kind of, like you said when we started this off, not many people know that these are even a problem. Unless you, for example, have a 17-year-old or a young person that was caught up in the system. That's when you'll know. And so what we've been doing is we've taken this research and we've been going around the state to communities. So in the past 5-6 months, we've been trying to kind of engage folks on the local level, see what kind of problems are they having. Is this an issue in your community? And if so, are you doing things at a local level that we don't necessarily know about, but that are really great solutions? And so we had 6 community events in Detroit and Grand Rapids and Saginaw and Flint and Battle Creek, all kind of high crime areas, places that we see a large population of 17-year-olds enter the system, or just young people entering the system. And we found that, yes, absolutely, we need to raise the age, that this is definitely a problem, but we need to do so in a smart way so that we can actually, when we bring the kids back into the juvenile system and we treat them as kids, we have enough resources to treat them, to keep them out of facilities, to treat them in the community.
We've seen that juvenile justice has done a lot to deinstitutionalize kids, put them back in the community. They don't have as many facilities statewide for juveniles as they once did, which is probably on balance a good thing.
It is a good thing.
But the challenge has been that when you get tried as an adult and you get put into adult facilities, that to me is an absolute scandal. When you see some of there's been some good journalism around that recently, what it's really like for these kids to get thrown into, especially male children with adult male sexual predators. And they keep saying, well, but the studies show that there's not that much rape in prison. Bull. It's because you're not dumb enough if you're in prison to tell people that that's what's happened to you, because things don't go well for you if you do.
You're absolutely right. In fact, we unfortunately have gotten national recognition in the state of Michigan for unfortunately having many sexual assault cases happen to young people who are in adult prisons. And the Atlantic Journal just recently put out, it's called Rape in American Prison, and it's all about a narrative of a 17-year-old boy who landed himself in prison and was sexually assaulted from day one from being there.
Yeah.
It's really horrific.
It is.
Yeah, it truly is.
Stacey, I've got a question. How many of the 17-year-olds, if there's statistics available, were arrested for drug offenses?
That's a really great statistic, and I do have that.
Because
Because it's a really great point.
that's an entry point for a lot of 17-year-olds.
Absolutely, and I think when we're talking about this population, you have to really understand. We wanted to know what kind of offenses they're committing, where in the state are they coming from, is it a discretionary practice, like are certain counties doing this more than others? About a little less than 2/3 were committed for nonviolent offenses, and you can break that down further. And so those are mostly drug offenses or property crime offenses, like theft or like other types of others, like embezzlement or fleeing police officers, or you're just kind of catch-all other. That means a third. About 30% of them were for violent offenses. But we also have to take a look at that 58% of those 17-year-olds never had a juvenile record. So they never actually were, had a chance of being treated or some sort of help and to be, what's the correct word? To be treated as a young person, as a kid, as they really are, mentally, physically, developmentally. In the state of Michigan, you have to stay in the school system until you turn 18. If you were talking about foster care laws, it counts all the way up until age 18. But for whatever reason, we still have it on the books that if you commit an offense, you have to be tried as an adult.
I think, too, one of the challenges that we face as a state and maybe as a nation is that we once had a real strong commitment to the idea of juvenile justice, that kids were kids. And kids, and the irony is, as we're learning more about brain development rather than less, I would hope, we're learning that young people really do take a long time to mature. New studies show that up until the age of 25, people have some level of diminished capacity in terms of being able to make smart decisions and not be impulsive. So it seems to me we've been trending in the wrong direction in our juvenile justice system by arguing that, 10-year-olds somehow knew what they're doing. And is it part of this just sort of general education, trying to educate people as to the fact that kids are not sophisticated actors in these situations?
I think it's a little bit of a combination of all those things. We are seeing trends nationally and in the state of Michigan. You are seeing fewer and fewer people entering the court system at a young age. You are.
Oh, good.
Which is a very good thing. When we did our research, we trended it over the past decade, so since 2003. But we started at that point because there had been research prior to that number. And if you really take a look all the way back to around 1996, 1995, where we really had the crux of our tough on crime era, you see a drastic...
Punk prisons.
Right, punk prisons, and we're going to, open up Baldwin and have it a privately run prison, and we all know that was a failed opportunity for many reasons. You see a drastic decline in young people entering the court system, which is a great thing. What you are seeing, though, are when kids come in, they're coming with much more complex backgrounds. So what we took a look in, and this was based on prior research, but we found that prior to entering prison, so young people 17 years old or kids that were waived from the adult system, 78% had a friend they knew that was killed or murdered prior to entering the system. 48% had a family member that was killed. So these are kids that are experiencing massive trauma. 81% had parents with substance abuse issues. Most of them, if they were in foster care, 44% of them were in foster care prior to entering the court system. And if they were in foster care, they were placed on an average 11 times. So these are kids
11
that
times.
have dramatic and traumatic histories, that are vulnerable, that are really set up to be committing crimes.
And so many of them are the sons and daughters of incarcerated people or people who've done time, because then they're... Yeah, and that's exactly why they end up in the foster system.
Exactly.
The greatest predictor of going into the adult system is having had contact with the juvenile justice system.
You are correct.
So sad but true, the juvenile justice system, it doesn't really repair kids as much as it just simply shuffles them through to the adult system in too many cases.
It is getting better.
Is it?
It is absolutely getting better. And like you said before, what we didn't have in 1996 or in 1998 and when this type of crime, we didn't have research. We didn't have brain development research. Right. We didn't understand that kids can really change over time, and that they are like sponges, and the way that you treat them, they're still developing up until age 25, that we should not be using punitive, but we should be using therapeutic treatments. And so that's kind of a great segue, because what we're doing now, we're culminating with all those great community events, and we've partnered with the MSU's Family Impact Seminars and the Department of Human Development and Family Analysis, and we're putting on what we're calling the Youth Beyond Bars Capital Forum. So we're really trying to go, like, how do we get these kids out of prison, out of jail, out of facilities that actually aren't treating them as youth? And so our keynote speaker is Representative Harvey Santana. He's kind of kicking it off for us, and we're having 2 plenary panels after that. One is a panel of formerly incarcerated 17-year-olds in the state of Michigan.
That'll be powerful.
One of them, his name is T.J. Parcell. He's actually a nationally known figure because when he was incarcerated in Michigan, he also was sexually assaulted at age 17. But he went on to take that story and wrote memoirs about it, and it was a nationally awarded book. And he went to consult with the U.S. PREA Commission. Now, PREA is the Prison Rape Elimination Act. It's a federally new law, a couple of years old now, that mandates that all adult facilities that house young people have to separate people under the age of 18 away from adults.
And all too often that means isolation.
It does. Which
And solitary, which is equally, I mean, it's under Amnesty International, it's torture.
It absolutely is. And so with these laws that we're looking into, I mean, solitary confinement is one of the issues that we're really trying to target. Again, we're behind in the state of how we deal with young people who are in solitary.
Think of the impact on a developing brain. I mean, that's just staggering.
Well, the other thing is, you're only following the state prisons, right? Not county jails.
Well, we're trying to do both.
County jails can be a pretty miserable experience.
County jails are actually, we're trying to do both. One of the topics pushed forward is to remove youth from all adult facilities and house them in facilities that are youth appropriate or age developmentally appropriate, and that includes jails. The majority of young people, when we did this, when I say 20,000 entered the adult correction system, they didn't all necessarily go to prison, but half of them at least spent some jail time together. In fact, if you spent jail time, you spent an average of 180 days, which is equivalent to a school year. And so jail time is absolutely, and that's jail is where you don't see programming. It's meant to be temporary. It's kind of it's a messier situation, and I think everyone would agree with that compared to prison.
So on this conference, where is it and when is it? And
Sure. The conference is a full day, and after that, we're having a plenary panel of formerly incarcerated youth, a plenary panel of leaders from other states who have raised their age. We're having U.S. State's Attorney from Illinois come out. Illinois just changed their age. Connecticut is coming out of folks, advocates from there and leaders, folks from D.C. who kind of survey the whole national landscape. And then we're having, the second half of the day is going to be part of the MSU Family Impact Seminar, and we're going to have professors talk about brain neuroscience and the intersection of brain development and adolescent development and why that's so important when we talk about these policies. And so it's on April 7th. It's a full day forum. It's at the Lansing Radisson Hotel on Grand Ave. We are charging $30 for registration.
We're not allowed to talk about fees on a nonprofit station.
Okay, but we won't talk. We'll take that back.
It was an accident.
It was an accident. We'll take it back. But it's all day forum. Excuse me. And the night before, we're kicking it off at Tropo with T.J. Parcell, who's the author. And
that's a familiar name. Yes,
Yeah.
I know that I know of him, and that's going to be, if I remember properly, that should be a very powerful.
It really should. And he's also a filmmaker, so he's trying to take his memoirs and put it into a feature-length film. Yeah. It's called Fish. The memoirs of a boy in a man's prison. So.
And they are called fish.
They are called fish.
Yes,
that's what you're called when you are a young person in prison.
Oh, that's such
What's the likelihood of this passing in Michigan, do you think?
I'm very optimistic. Does that sound like politician talk? Yeah.
If you're watching this on radio, you can't see that our guest Todd Haywood is busy shaking his head. He's covered the legislature a long time.
He definitely wasn't nodding.
Yeah, this legislature is not going to back off of this. They're very much as tough on crime as they can get. Ironically, Representative Santana was one of 3 Democrats that crossed over to vote in support of the religious discrimination bills in adoption. So this whole issue is tied up in, we've got 3,000 plus foster kids up for adoption that are going to be trapped in the adoption system, and yet here's a lawmaker who's helping cause that problem. So I think there's some real wefting that's going to happen here.
But you know how it works, though. What happens is that it takes pounding on it year after year.
Sure.
You have to create a space for that.
Representative Howrlack, who's very much in support of these bills, is more of a Tea Party type candidate or legislator. So we do have that kind of mixture between the Democrat who's kind of gone to the other side and the Tea Party man who's kind of who sees this kind of intersection of the state where it really shouldn't be on individual rights. That's why I'm so hopeful.
I would like to thank Kristen for joining us, Kristen Staley, and I hope you'll come back frequently and keep us surprised. The Michigan Council for Crime and Delinquency, if those of you who may not know it, I know it back from the old days with Beth Arnovitz, who was the executive director. Remarkable woman who kept that organization thriving in an era when all the other states were losing theirs, and they were losing an opportunity, really. She's done so much to work with young mothers and do prevention side, and always talked about it's keeping a kid out of the system is a lot smarter than trying to repair adults, and that's what we need to do more of. And thank you so much for coming. And
thank you.
I hope that the people who need to be there will be there on Saturday.
It's a Tuesday, April 7th.
Tuesday.
That's all day.
Tuesday, April 7th. Thank you.
No problem.
And that would also be a session day for the State House and the State Senate. So the lawmakers are in town. So hopefully they'll actually show up. That would be nice.
It's a hopeful, that's kind of the hope.
And maybe a few people can wander over there. It's not that far.
Yeah.
We could invite the unholy trinity of Gary Glenn, Cindy Gamrat, and Todd Corser. Just make sure you've got a seat for them.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
This is LCC Radio WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. And next we wanted to turn to the person you've already heard from, Todd Haywood, who we can barely keep him down anytime. I'm only surprised he didn't open the show for us because he's a good talker, yeah. But he has a new job, and he is doing wonderful things for Lansing City Pulse in terms of investigative reporting, which is an important part of any alternative newspaper's mission. But it's very tough to do. It's very tough. I mean, it's a rough job. First of all, you have to have a thick skin.
Yes, I do.
Unlisted address.
Unlisted address.
That's not going to happen. So
Tell us
I do have a good security system.
Your most recent story did not make you many new friends in the community, I suspect.
No, there are a lot of very unhappy people. We uncovered that a lot of folks who had received just over $22 million in tax abatements since 2006 for developing properties. And in those property developments, many of them had mixed retail and residential. Well, Lansing has a rental registration law. And unfortunately, 4 of the 11 projects that we identified had not registered their rental properties.
And by failing to do so, what did that do?
Well,
it's a requirement that you have to do so if you receive those abatements.
Well,
right?
it's part of the agreement that you'll follow all the local laws and ordinances and that sort of stuff. So, but on top of that, it also sets a bad example when code compliance is out there trying to find the unlicensed houses and rentals in the community right now. You know, what were termed throughout the interview process by everybody as the bad players. Mm-hmm. Well, they can point to the developers and say, you didn't get the developers, why are you coming after me? So that raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, Todd, were the developers, should they have known this specific ordinance about it?
You know, I think some of them should have, because they have other rental properties that were properly registered. But I think for like the Ides, this is their first residential property. So I think it's hard to point your finger at the Ides and say you should have known, but they're also a multi-billion-dollar construction company, right? So one would expect that they would try and make themselves semi-familiar with the laws that are going on so that they know what they should and shouldn't do. You would think and you would expect that from a responsible corporate citizen.
One of the challenges, and I was talking about this with another group at lunch, and we were talking about social justice issues, and we were talking about the fact that there are no more people on staff anymore to check on things anymore.
Right. That was the really frustrating thing for me, is that, you know, we have this database, this rental portal, this inspection portal through the city website. It's not up to date. It's supposed to be updated every 24 hours.
Wow.
But it's not. So I actually ended up having to call in to code compliance and then go down and go over the hard files just to make sure that, in fact, none of these properties had been properly registered or were missing.
It seems to me a new developer and the city would share a checklist of all the things you have to do, and that would.
Well, you know,
simple.
Lansing Economic Area Partners, when I brought this to Bob Trezis's attention, his response was, I didn't even think about this. It just was not on anybody's radar. nobody had ever thought, wow, we should probably make sure that this is something we talk about.
That's one of the challenges of good government. You have to have enough people with enough time to think about what needs to be done. We were
Right.
talking about this earlier in terms of food inspections, for example.
Right.
You know, the idea that, well, we find out that on food labels that the calorie counts aren't straight, right? Who looks, right? Who's out there checking? They can't even find contaminated food.
Right.
Who do you think is in a little kitchen someplace saying, hey, it's only 110 calories, and they said, 120? No, nobody's checking for that
Right.
stuff. There may be rules and regulations, but it's so difficult to make a functioning system.
Right, absolutely. And that I think is part of what we're going to struggle with as we continue to struggle with declining state revenues
Yes.
in the state. And I certainly don't hold city officials responsible for the lack of funding, but it raises the question of how do we fund these things?
Yeah.
And the reality is that voters play a role in this too, because if you ask a voter, do you want a code compliance officer on the road or do you want a cop, they're going to go for the cop every time, and rightfully so. But that code compliance officer's job is oftentimes more important. If you go by the broken window construct of community policing, that code compliance officer becomes significantly more important in preventing the breakdown in the neighborhood.
Todd, is it your feeling that East Lansing is much more strict when it comes to rental enforcement because of the university students?
Well, I think that plays a role in it, but I also think they also
They have
have
LCC students that they ought to be,
yeah, but they also have a higher tax base, so
Yeah.
they have and a smaller area to patrol.
Yeah.
So I think they have some unique realities that just simply don't apply to Lansing, but they also are much more aggressive. I mean, it is my understanding that they're beginning to do some undercover sting operations to identify the unlicensed rentals.
Wow.
Which, Lansing, we what I was told by the code compliance chief was, well, we're waiting for citizens to call us.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you...
And to complain about it.
Yeah, and I will tell you that if my experience of calling in about unregistered rentals was any instance of what we're dealing with, I was questioned. Are you sure that's really a rental? Yes, I'm absolutely certain that's a rental. I know that's been a rental for actually several years.
Todd, without giving away a source, or if you would have to answer this question, don't, how did you trip over this story? So what was the impetus for it?
I'd been wondering, honestly, about...
Curiosity.
Yeah, that's my big problem is I'm truly curious.
Yep.
And I had a scenario where some folks that I know had run into some situations with a property owner, and I said, that property is supposed to be registered. And that set me down the list of looking at all of that. I went, well, this is a big problem. So that's how we got here.
But we also want to encourage people who have business that Todd ought to know about to leak to him as quickly as possible. Think of
Yes.
him as your local Edward Snowden.
And you can email me at todd@lansingcitypulse.com.
See? TODD. And so if you have dirt and ideally documents to back it up, it'll always take a nice PDF on that email.
And make sure you put a telephone number there so
Uh-huh.
I can reach out to you and have a conversation with you. And I will tell you, I'm gonna tease everybody a little bit.
Yes.
Coming out on Wednesday, East Lansing wastewater treatment plant. Problems are continuing from the mercury spill. And
Should we be surprised?
I think you will be surprised with what this report comes out with. And then the other issue is we've got some transgender concerns happening for the trans community.
That's
that are really
important.
troubling.
That's important. I've seen more and more people becoming vocal about wanting transgender rights maintained and expanded and taken care of. It's a concern. I think that's the next on the agenda, isn't it?
Well, I will tell you, I was at a national conference in Philadelphia last weekend. For
Getting food poisoning.
Yes, getting food poisoning. Thank you very much. Tuna tartare is not something I'll be eating again anytime in the near future.
I don't recommend the chicken tartare either.
This stuff's not cooked. You knew that.
I thought because this was a Comcast sponsored reception that they would have paid for.
They knew who you were, Todd.
That's exactly it. No,
You got
because
the special
there were several of us that ate the tuna tartare who spent the next day quite ill. But which is as far as I'll go. Thank you very much. But
Visuals about it, yeah.
in between visits to the bathroom, during the conference, the big issue really is transgender identity and transgender rights and transgender equality, and there is a real conflict happening across the country.
Yeah.
I think it is the new front in what the right wing would call the culture wars.
Yeah.
They see it as a dissolution of binary gender.
Right.
They see it as a dissolution of traditional gender roles, anti-biblical. That's why you see, in fact, have you been following the case out of Midland about the woman who lost her membership in the Planet
Yes.
Fitness? Yeah, she filed a
Planet
lawsuit
Fitness,
today.
mhm.
She filed a lawsuit today against Planet Fitness for discriminating against her, for complaining
No,
about
she
the
was not the transgender woman.
Right.
She was the woman who was.
She was a
upset that
Christian-
there was
a Christian
yes.
woman. And she's hired a guy named David Kallman, who is well-known right-wing
Yes.
radical Christian attorney who believes that all government should be a Christian theocratic construct.
It's Ted Cruz voters.
No,
Because he just
these
came out
make
today at Liberty
yes.
University and said all laws should be
Yeah.
based on
Yeah,
Christ.
these make Ted Cruz look actually pretty calm. So, pretty radical right-wing folks. Gary Glenn ilk, really.
Yeah.
And in fact, there seems to be some connection between this Cormier, who's the complainant in Midland, and Gary Glenn. So we'll see how that unfolds.
It's
as
a
well.
pretty sad scenario that we're seeing here. I'm surprised it's become such a flashpoint, but it really has.
It absolutely has. And you know what? At the end of the day, people got to pee.
That's what I said on Facebook the other day.
And
I
do
mean,
other things.
yeah.
Well, yeah, okay, and they got poop.
Yeah, and it's not that big a deal. you
It's
know?
really not.
No.
But I also look back in the early 90s when I was doing a lot of LGBT activism and I was really sort of cutting my teeth on LGBT activism. The bathroom mongering, fear mongering about gay men using the bathroom.
Exactly.
Was, those gays are going to go in and molest your children and rape your daughters. What?
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
Yeah.
But I think we're